people have different opinions of that level of control over what you say. I'm an advocate of free speech, but not when that free speech incites violence against other people, because then that is for me not just an opinion. It's actually trying to get someone else to do something, against what is essentially the law. You can't go around beating people up or doing things like that. So, in general, we're fairly safe in the UK to talk about most things as long as you don't use those things as a hatred against another group or anything like that, which I think is fair enough because I think we don't want that sort of stuff being put in the media and people reading it and inciting people. There's opinions and then there's things that go beyond that. And I think that's where you've got to sort of think, how do you draw a line? It's very difficult. I don't know. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't like to police it. But ultimately, I still believe people need to be treated with respect. And therefore, you should not promote hate against a religious group or any other type of group based on their religion. I think that's overstepping a mark of free speech. Well, we're the government. We can do whatever we want. Well, I don't think a government can do whatever they want. They can't just break their own laws. So these sort of things, they're out there, and it does create a problem for people to discern, and you shouldn't come down on emotions to make a decision whether something is right or wrong, because your emotions can be swayed by how it affects you. So you've got to be very careful how you discern things based on, are you biased in any way? Are your emotions involved which cause you to make decisions which are not necessarily the right decisions, the righteous decisions? What would Jesus do? Jesus has forgiven everybody for whatever they've done. So from that perspective, no, God doesn't keep any record of wrongs or treat people differently on the fact of their behavior. Now, there may be consequences in a worldly sense, but from God's perspective, all of those consequences have already been dealt with. He's reconciled everyone to himself. Therefore, how then do you view that? Do we then view people differently from the way God views people? And I think primarily the church has, in that it's used certain things that the Bible says to allow it to say, well, the Bible says it's okay. Hence, well, slavery was okay. Well, we know it isn't, but you could argue that the Bible says it is. And lots of other things, genocide, a lot of other things, because the Bible is supposedly saying that God allowed that or told them to do it, which he didn't. Then that gives you the thing. We have the same thing in our country where we've got a political party that's rising up, which is right wing, nationalist, and was promoting in their party conference, well, we need to base everything on the Judeo-Christian ethic because that allows retribution from his perspective. Not talking about the New Testament where Jesus says, love your enemies. So they go back into any bit in the Old Testament that they think fits into their agenda. And the law system in most Western countries is based on a Judeo-Christian ethic, which is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, Jesus sort of knocked that one on the head. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say unto you something different. Love your enemies. So I think we've got to be very careful in testing our own motives and asking, is this coming from a motive of love or not? And if it isn't, don't do it. That would be my thing.
I think Margaret Thatcher said that socialism works till you run out of other people's money. And politicians never admit they're wrong, so they continue in the same manner, and they use um, the
But
violence.
conservatism does the same. It's still taxing you, and it's still using your taxes to provide services. And when they run out of taxes, they either put the taxes up or they borrow more money to do it. So in effect, each government I mean, the US is what, trillions in debt. So it may have, like Trump may have decided he's going to lower taxes for rich people, but then where is he going to get the money to provide the services for the country? Well, he's going to borrow. Therefore, he'll get the country more and more in debt. So no matter what political system you sort of lean towards, none of them have the answers. They're all coming from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. They're all our do-it-yourself best we can come up with to govern. You know, none of them have a solution. You can say socialism is bad because it taxes more. Okay, you could say that, but then you could also say the richest people are then helping the poorest people out. Isn't that not a good thing? You know, it's how you look at it. If you tend towards conservatism or beyond that into any form of capitalism, then you're going to say, well, we want people to make more money, so we've got more taxes and we can use those taxes. But if they don't make more money, the economy crashes or whatever, then where are you going to get the money from? You've either got to tax people more or tax the richest people higher, perhaps, or you borrow. That's how a country works, unfortunately. I don't think that's the best way of doing it either way around, but it is the systems we live in. If you were in another country, we're going to Albania in October for 10 days on a tour of Albania. They had a heavy dictatorship for many, many years under the communist regime, which was heavier than communism, in that religion was forbidden. There was no churches or mosques or anything allowed. Now that has fallen, and now tourism is going into the country and everything's back open and everything like that. Now, there are some people who may have liked to be told what to do by a dictator, and there are others who desperately were swimming to Corfu, you know, to try and escape Albania during that period of time. So they didn't want to live under an oppressive regime. So there's dictatorship. You could say, well, benevolent dictatorship, that's a good thing. It isn't. Living under God's kingdom is a good thing. Anything else is going to be second best, and most of it is much worse than that. But we live in these things, so we need to navigate through the minefield of how do we deal with the political systems we live under that we may agree or not agree, or some agree and some not agree with. Because you're going to get division based on your political beliefs, which is what happens in most countries, which have got one or two, maybe three parties that are potentially could win. So ultimately, you just divide the country up on political opinion. And if you've got people who really don't like that, then they do all sorts of stuff to try and disrupt the government, which I don't think is what God wants. You know, I think we've got to be discerning and look at what things are in alignment with God's heart and what things aren't. Support those things aren't, and don't agree with those things that aren't. You know, that's the things. You know, look at it on, does this align with God and God's heart? And then go from there about what you're going to do. But be very careful that you don't do something violently rather than show your disapproval in a non-violent way.
Okay, Bill's.
Mike, when you're over in Albania, if you're asked to speak, now that's basically because it was, as you said, hardcore communist, and probably religion was forbidden.
It was, yeah.
Or at least Christianity. And you were asked to speak a couple of sessions to people that didn't know anything about God. Would your message, and I know you'd ask God how to speak in that, but just saying you had done that and you were before a crowd of people that were probably didn't know anything about God, would your message be evangelical? And if it was, how would you? I know it wouldn't be like Billy Graham, come on up because you might die tonight. What would your message be?
Well, it wouldn't be evangelical in the way evangelicals preach the gospel. So I would preach the true gospel, which is a gospel of love. So I would tell people how good God is, how much he loves them and what he's done for them in reconciling them, forgiving them, wanting them to come into a relationship. And then I would invite them to come into that relationship by giving them an opportunity of experiencing God's love. I wouldn't do it and in a sense of, I'll go and pray a prayer. So I would talk about what are the benefits of having a relationship with God? Being forgiven, being accepted, being loved, being affirmed, being given your identity, giving freedom to fulfill your destiny in life. All the positives, I would highlight all the positives of a relationship with an unconditionally loving God, and I would then show all the negatives of not, basically, that you're living under your own do-it-yourself system. You're weary of trying to fulfill life where God is our provider, God's our protector. I would give people an opportunity of coming into a place of rest by showing them how good God is, and then sort of debunking what religion says about God. You know, God isn't going to send you to hell. God isn't going to punish you. God isn't going to do, because he loves you unconditionally. Jesus came to remove all those things from the world by saving us from the consequences of our lost identity, living, hardship, toil, and labor in life. So I would be very positive in looking to tell them what God is really like, and then give them an opportunity of experiencing that by some sort of encounter, you know, so that they had an experience that they could say, wow, that was amazing. Whatever it was, whether it was a feeling, whether it was a physical sensation, whether it was an emotional thing, whatever it would be, whether it was a peace that came upon them. I believe if you give people an opportunity of encountering God, then they will experience something which gives them a foundation then to continue that relationship with God in grace rather than by works.
Back at talking about in Ukraine, Zelensky is going after the Christians, though he's shutting down their ability to worship and that.
Well, I think you need to take that with a pinch of salt, because that I've got a Ukrainian lady staying here. She's lived with us for 3 years. She's a Christian. There is no removing the rights of Christians to worship at all. This is part of the problem of hearing things. Where does that information come from? Is it a legitimate source of information? From my experience of asking our Ukrainian guest about, now she may not politically support Zelensky, but that's not the point. Do her parents, and is she able to go to church whenever she's back in Ukraine? Yeah, of course she is. There's no problem whatsoever with that. Evangelically, charismatically, they got all sorts of churches in Ukraine. And as far as I'm aware, from what she's told me, there is no problem with any of them worshiping. So I don't know who said that that's what there's. Probably someone who's got something against him. And this is part of the problem. I don't believe anything I read or hear online. My stance would be I'm not believing any of that until either God verifies that to me or I get independent verification from someone I know who can tell me the truth, because they're there on the ground. You know, otherwise you just hear things and you just basically think, oh, Leslie's doing this. I don't believe he is.
And with AI, it's become so difficult to figure out what is true and what is not true. Now, even the ship being bombed, the boat being bombed, right, which became so popular. The boat has a range of 200 miles. And now that open boat carrying all those people is traveling 1,615 miles from Venezuela to to the US. How is it possible? Like, you got to think.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the range of that boat was. They probably no one knows unless they know the specific type of boat. I know most boats that I've been on have a range of more than 200 miles because they've got massive diesel tanks, usually. I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't know, but therefore I wouldn't comment on the range of the thing. But it's been verified by the US government that they destroyed a boat, supposedly carrying drugs. So whether it came from Venezuela or it stopped off somewhere else in the Panama Canal, picked up some fuel, refueled several times on their way, I don't know. But the bottom line is Vance came out yesterday and said it was a good use of American military things to destroy a boat, regardless of who was on board and whether he had the right to do that. He said it was okay. Now, that if the government says it's okay, it gives a validation for the violence, as far as I'm concerned. And who knows who was on that boat? Could have been kids. Now, you could have, I'm not saying they weren't drug runners or whatever else, but who knows who was on the boat? There were apparently 11, 12 people on there or something. No one actually proved categorically by stopping the boat and finding the drugs whether there were drugs on board or not. It's all done by intelligence. Whose intelligence? Again, you're going back to, they made a decision based on someone saying this drug mule or whatever it was, boat was carrying drugs. We're going to destroy it before it gets to the US. No judge, no jury, no proof that would be valid in law. I mean, let's face it. America went to war. Britain went to war in Iran, Iraq, sorry, and all those places based on what? Evidence that proved to be completely false by the intelligent community that said there were weapons of mass destruction being made. And when they went in there, they couldn't find any. Basically, our prime minister lost his whole legacy on the basis of that by joining in with Bush to go and do that, because we're going to get rid of Saddam Hussein because he was developing weapons of mass destruction. Found out they weren't. So were they lying? Yes. Was it false evidence? Was the stuff? Who knows? But the proof at the end of the day was that it was an illegitimate war.
Mike, I want to go back to you. You're in Albania at a conference. Yeah. Sorry, guys. I just want to make sure in the message that you'd be telling them, would you be honest to say that you haven't come into a realization that God's pure light in Christ is in you?
Yes.
And you've been reconciled to God. Everything's been forgiven. The key is that I could say you're not headed to hell, but because there is no hell. But the fact is that you still have to come into an acceptance of Him. You're being cleansed by Him.
Oh, absolutely.
He's done that for you. Yeah. And so is that part of what you like? I'm just trying to figure out when you're talking to someone, because I don't want to do it you don't want to do it the old way, because I'm going to put you back on the treadmill. I'm going to put them on the treadmill I was on.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I would be looking to say, this is what God has done for you because He loves you. And God so loves you that He's not separated from you. He's in you, and He wants to reveal His presence in you so you can experience being loved unconditionally, living in peace, having joy in your life, all the positive things that God intends, because He dwells there and He wants you to know that. I would probably say most of what you've heard about God through religion is probably a lie or a deception. So don't think about what you have heard. This is the truth. What Jesus did was to enable you to have a relationship with God by removing every barrier and obstacle. And He wants you to know that. Now, yes, you have to come to accept that to experience it. If you don't believe it, you're not going to experience anything you don't believe. So it's coming to, but it's not your faith or belief that makes it happen. It's already happened. Your belief enables you to experience what's already happened, when if you didn't believe it or know it, you wouldn't experience it. So it's actually coming to experience the truth, which is already true. You just don't know it yet. When you come to know it, you will then experience that truth. So it's already been done. What we do doesn't make God do anything. He's already done it. What we do is come to that realization and acceptance and experience what He's already done for us, because He loves us unconditionally. It's all done through what Jesus did to deal with the problem, which was our lost identity, and to remove that problem by forgiving us from living independently of Him. And now He invites you to come into a relationship with Him, which He already has with you. It's just you don't know it. And I think, and if they were sufficiently religious and have some background in Orthodox religion or whatever it might be, then they may have questions. And usually in that sort of setting, I would ask them to give them an invitation to ask their questions. Because they might be like, yeah, but what about this? What about this in the Bible? And what about this? And I'm saying, well, okay, let's look at those things. And then I would unpack what they think the Bible says to what it really says, to remove all the obstacles that they've been told. Or what about going to hell? What about God tormenting and punishing people? What about all the things? What about God doing this negative, bad thing? You know, I would try and help them to see that isn't the reality, and that the Bible isn't what they need to have a relationship with God. They need to experience what is already there for them freely, because God believes in them and they're all his children, and he loves them all equally the same and individually, because they're his children. And look to actually say this is the truth, rather than what you thought might have been true culturally or religiously, and try and demystify that to them, give them an opportunity. Would you like to experience God within you right now? Yeah. And yeah, I could use the Bible if they're happy to use that in terms of, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Do you want to open the door? The door is inside you. Let God in you and fill you. You know, you can use all sorts of different things, or you could use, Jesus said, whoever comes to me and drinks this water will never thirst again, and will have within them a fountain that they can drink from evermore. So you can use different illustrations that would give them a way of connecting to the message, which is why Jesus used parables and stories to try and make it sort of accessible to them, rather than coming up with a highfalutin theological position about what it is to be justified and, you know, all that stuff. Yeah, make it plain and simple. God's already forgiven you for everything you could ever do, because you didn't know any better, mostly, or you did know better and you chose to go against what you knew. Regardless of the things, the forgiveness is already there for you. Just receive it. Enter into the forgiven state of being righteous, because God has made them as righteous as he's made us. They don't know it, therefore they're not living out of a state of righteousness. They're living out of a state of independence and lost identity, which is what the Bible calls sin. You know, and there are lots of things. They might think, well, do I have to stop doing this to be accepted by God? You know, I mean, a friend of mine was asked the question, you know, do I have to stop sleeping with girls if I become a Christian? And I'm like, I know what he was going to answer, because he comes from a evangelical background. He said yes. And the guy walked away disappointed. Now, I would have said, no, God accepts you as you are. But the likelihood is when you come to know God, you won't need to go sleeping around, because you'll have found something better than that will have met your emotional needs in him. So I wouldn't have told him, no, you don't, because I would have trusted that God will deal with all of that after he knows God. But that's the problem with the evangelical thing. They put obstacles in people's way of behavior. That behavior won't be acceptable if you become a Christian. Well, who said? Therefore, you're already putting a condition on unconditional love. So God won't love you unless you stop doing that. And the reality is, let God deal with the behavior once they have a relationship. Don't put behavioral issues as an obstacle for people to come into a relationship. God's not. He's not saying, well, you have to do this before you're acceptable to me. No, he's already made them acceptable by making them righteous. They just don't know it.
Mike, if the pastor said that you can sleep around with girls, then you wouldn't need the pastor.
Well, in reality, no one is saying that's a good thing. And if I had been asked the question, I would say, well, why do you need to do that? What is it? What need is it meeting in you? Because the guy's probably obviously insecure, doesn't really know who he is, therefore it's getting his value and worth from relationships with girls and buying into the whole thing that sex will make you happy and all this stuff. So I'll ask the questions and unpack it for them, you know. But I never say you can't come to God unless you stop doing this. Or if you come to God, do you have to stop doing that? That's not my business to do that. I can say, actually, is that making you happy? You know, is it making the other person happy? How many broken relationships have you had, and who came out with a good out of it all? You know, you can unpack the whole thing to say, hey, it's not exactly a good life anyway, is it? But the reality is God loves them irrespective. And God and the Spirit, as the Spirit dwells in them, will help them realize that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing breaking people's hearts. It's not a good thing to be looking for sex to meet some sort of need in you. It's not a good thing. No one wins, really, in the end of the day. You just feel devalued. They feel devalued. It doesn't really work. But it doesn't stop you coming to God. You know, and that's the issue. It's how it's phrased. You know, and that poor guy's gone away thinking God will never accept him unless he behaves, which is just a total lie.
Sometimes the moment of truth, it's when you realize that God will accept you no matter what your circumstances. I've talked to my neighbor till I was blue in the face. And I think about 2.5 years ago, he had a very bitter separation from his wife and kids. And he was missing for about 2 years, you know. And yeah, he went to live with someone else and his parents took over. And I met him day before yesterday. I just looked at his face and I said, I couldn't even recognize it. There's this wonderful sort of peace within this guy, you know. And I said, I can feel something totally different, James. What happened? And he said, I was baptized, and that's the first thing he said. And I met God, you know, and what a sea change.
Well, that's what happens. If you let God touch someone's life, then they're going to be changed by it. They're going to experience something they've not before. And even if it even happens in a religious setting, you know, I mean, I was born, you know, and then grew up in a Christian sort of environment and then became a Christian. It's like I still knew something had happened in my life, and all the way through I could testify to what God was doing, even though I didn't really know who God really was. He's still a good God. He still blessed me even though I didn't know it, you know, and even though I wasn't fully aware of who he was, you know. And everyone who comes to God, even if they're in a religious setting, will notice a change because they've come into a relationship with him. The problem is then those people may then get drawn into religious works to keep that relationship, and they lose the sort of the freedom that they had, and then they've got to work for it again, you know. And that's the danger. I mean, most people have a honeymoon period, as it's called. As a Christian, everything's wonderful. Oh, I've got this wonderful relationship with God, I'm forgiven, it's wonderful. And then the rubber hits the road, they got to toe the religious line, you know. And unfortunately that's what happens a lot of the time. The freedom and grace that people experience God in becomes law and works once they're in a system.
So really, in that conference that you're in over in Albania, you'd be fair to say, you know what, this is to the atheists, say, you are already clothed and covered in Christ's righteousness. There's nothing you have to do. All you need to now just experience it, to come to a realization that's been freely given to you. And through that relationship, everything, his plans and everything else, he'll start to work out with you in that relationship, period. Now, how would you like to take time now and just let's experience that so you can come into that realization? Is it as simple as that you do?
Yeah, that would be as simple as that. And if there was an atheist, I would just sort of, and they had genuine questions. Most people are atheists because they don't believe in the God that Christians have promoted or any other religion. You know, they're not necessarily atheists because they philosophically can't believe in a God. They just can't believe in the gods that we have promoted. If you ask genuinely an atheist, how much knowledge of the universe do you have? Let's say, you know, give me a percentage of the universe knowledge that you have. And if they're, you know, a bit smug, they might say 10% or whatever. In reality, they're probably talking about 0.2% or something. In the 99.8% left, you're saying is there couldn't be a God in there. Well, the reality is they would be stupid to say, no, there can't be, because they don't know, do they? So effectively, most atheists are agnostics unless we're talking about the gods that have already been projected to them. Then they've become an atheist because they don't believe that they would even want a God like that. So they wouldn't want to believe in a God like that. But still, most of them, if they end up in a really bad situation, will cry to God for help. That's just the way it is, you know. But I don't honestly believe genuinely most atheists are philosophically bound to that. If you look at the new atheists, Hitchens and all those, they're really objecting to the nature of the God that we have said, who's going to punish people forever if they don't accept him. That's the God they've rejected. I've rejected that God too, because he doesn't exist. He's a figment of religious imagination. He's not who God really is. So I'm an atheist to that God, but I know the true loving God who I have a relationship with, you know, and that is the God I know. And yes, I could invite them to come and know that God as well. You know, they only have to make a choice to say, hey, would you give God a chance to show himself to you? Well, they'd be pretty stupid to say no, wouldn't they? Because if they said no and it was true, then they're not receiving it. If they say yes and it isn't true, they're not going to experience anything. It will just reaffirm what they already believe. So they've got nothing to lose, really. If it isn't true, then they're not going to experience any. If it is true, you'd be stupid not to experience it. So you can give them a sort of fairly rational argument for just giving God a chance to show himself to them. You know, and you know, say genuinely give him a chance. Don't just make it up in your head or pretend. No, you know, if all you have to do is say, look, God, if you are true, if you are real, even though I didn't believe you are, well, show yourself to me. They're giving him a chance, and we can help them with that chance by facilitating an opportunity for them to experience him.
It's funny. They've installed the outdoor exercise equipment in our parks, and so I was out there doing one of the exercises, you know, and this stranger comes up to me and he's telling me, he says, you look like you're retired. I said, yeah. He says, what do you do with all your time and stuff like that? So so I get up and I said, well, I'm going to go for my normal walk. And so he says, can I come with you? So he started walking with me, and he tells me, you know, about his wife and that, you know, she wants to travel. And I said, well, why don't you go with her? Oh, I don't want to travel. And then he starts telling me he's an atheist. Yeah. And so I'm, you know, I'm just trying to stay quiet. I don't want to start a fight and stuff like this. And so I just found it interesting that that's his first point of reference, that, you know, it's like a badge of honor that he's an atheist.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, if someone had said that to me, I would say, well, can you explain why? What brought you to that belief? You know, and find out about them, show some interest. Because when you understand why they believe what they do, then you've got a good understanding of how you might help them realize that that might not be such a good idea.
Yeah, I have another friend that is an atheist as well, but it's because as a child, his cousin was ill, and he prayed for his cousin, and she never got healed. So he's angry at God.
Yeah, and so you can find the reasons genuinely with most people. There's a reason why, and that reason might be that they don't like the God that they've been projected with, or it might be that something happened to them. Some people, they were brought up in the Catholic Church and they were abused by the priest. Well, that's not going to promote God very well, is it? So there are different things like that. Most people have a reason for why they believe what they believe. They didn't just wake up one day and said, "Oh, I'm going to be an atheist today." They have a reason, whichever that is, and I'd like to find out. Because it's like that will be a good topic of discussion. I don't have to tell them I'm a Christian or whatever. I can just ask them the questions so that they can explain why they think the way they do.
It's almost impossible not to believe in intelligent design. I mean, if you look at the human body and in the trillions of transactions it does every second,
Yeah.
It's how can you believe that there's no creator, there's no design behind that? The other alternative is chaos theory. Everything is random, and nothing is, in sync. And then we need to actually create the earth in our own image, right? So we are in this mess because we are solely trying to be in charge and run the world according to our own design and failing miserably.
Yeah.
Without the glue, love, nothing will ever work.
No, and at the end of the day, we come up with all sorts of theories to try and explain things so that people will have some sort of understanding, and they choose the theory that most aligns with what they probably grew up with in their family or at school and other things. So some might be, evolutionists because that's what they were taught at school as a fact. Now, it doesn't take very long to debunk that evolution is a fact because there's no actual evidence to say it is a fact. It's a theory based on circumstantial evidence, and you can sort of easily give questions towards that theory. But there are other theories. Intelligent design is a theory that we would sort of accept because we have a relationship with the designer. So it totally makes sense for us. So it's beyond a theory to us because we have some experiential knowledge of the truth. But I wouldn't fall out with people over if they're a creationist or intelligent design or an evolutionist. Bottom line is, it's actually hard to prove categorically anything of those theories until you have an experience that gives you the testimony that does give you evidence for that. It's like there's a creator. Well, if I've never met the creator, intelligent design is less easy to believe. Even though you can say, well, yeah, the chances of all this happen randomly are billions and billions to one. Well, it's still a chance in their view, because that's what they've been taught, so they're programmed and conditioned by the education system to have certain beliefs or to accept that these things are true, based on very little hard facts evidence. But they're theories, and those theories have some validity when you look at certain things in the world, and then you look at other things and they don't have any validity. It's like, well, that don't work very well. But yeah, they're all what we come up with to effectively, most of them are based on a humanistic perspective of the universe, in that it doesn't require God. Because that was the point of, you don't need God. You can be your own God. That was what was offered Eve as a transaction. And that's what people have been doing for the rest of time, trying to do things in a do-it-yourself manner. But actually, most people believe in God of some sort. When you actually look at the world and how many people there are that follow religion of some sort, they believe in some sort of God or some sort of gods, depending on if you come from a Hindu background or whatever. So it's the minority that would say they're atheists. But there are some that are genuinely, that's their belief. Now, there are those that will look at the world and they will see science is God. They look at science. Science just says how, or it doesn't say why or who. It just says how, generally. Well, this is how this happens. If you believe in a Big Bang, okay, that's how everything started, by some explosion of energy. Well, where did it come from? They can't tell you that. They've got theories, but then where did that come from? So who started it? And they haven't really got an answer to that, because that's not what science does. Science can't say who, it just says how. So science really doesn't stop you believing in God, and there are many scientists who do, because they have a relationship with God, but they're still trying to find out how God did stuff. Well, how does the world work? How is light function? How does reality form? They're looking, whether they're looking at quantum physics or sort of larger physics and other things. Scientists, if they're genuine, are only looking at, well, this is how we think this happened. But to humanists, science is God. To them, that they see that essentially we can prove everything. We'll find out how everything happened. There won't be a God behind it. That's how they will see it. But actually, genuinely, the more you delve into what true science has discovered, you discover the God's there. It makes more sense that there's a God, not less.
It's interesting how our human body is so amazing. And I came across this stuff on humming, and that our voice box is against our vagus nerve. And so it's like God put a massage tool in our bodies that can stimulate things, and all the things that humming can do for you. That vibrates the mucosal lining in the nasal cavity and produces nitric oxide, and so you get more oxygen if you hum. And the monks used to do that tonal humming, and so, like, there's so much that's been lost to us, so many lost arts, and we don't realize, like, our body it's like its own first aid kit, and it can remove the anxiety and trauma just by us humming. Like, it's amazing.
Absolutely, yeah. Humming, tapping is another thing. Yeah, people tap certain places in their body which are sort of meridians for energy, and that can help. I mean, there's all sorts of things which I think are there, which are built into the body because God designed the body for immortality, not for death. And therefore, discovering that we have immortality, we can discover all the things that God made us to be able to function in, and that includes all those type of things. Essentially, if we are thankful, grateful, happy, then we program our immune system to be healthy. If we're negative, miserable, angry, frustrated, and bitter, it has a negative effect on our immune system, because our emotions are tied to our body. We're made to be whole in a holistic way, not just to be separated up into one bit and another. So I think most studies on disease will say that there is some form of mental mindset issue behind it. Stress, anxiety, fear, worry, all those negative emotions or feelings and thoughts are behind it, which influence the body. And yeah, there may be physical disease, but the body is susceptible to those diseases because it's not in harmony. when you're living in pure harmony, in coherence is another way of putting it, then you are resistant to disease. But if you are lowering your frequency with those negative emotions, then you are making yourself more susceptible to disease.
Yeah, well, even nitric oxide, it says actually it gets in your bloodstream, and it's antiviral. So it actually helps your body against foreign invaders. So it was just amazing to me, and that it can reduce your pain by humming because it blocks the pain receptors. So, and the sound of the humming fills your nerve ending. So I just was amazed. Like, I'm thinking, I haven't hummed since I was a kid. I'm going to start humming again.
But when do you normally hum? When you're happy.
Yeah.
That's really when you're joyful and happy, you hum, you sing to yourself, you make positive noises. That's what you do. You whistle. They're all of these things are signs that you're in a healthy state emotionally, which brings a positive thing to your whole being.
Yeah.
And humming is a positive thing.
And it said it was anti-aging because it helps circulate the cerebral spinal fluid and gives you brain health. And I'm thinking, I was just blown away that,
we want to hear, come on, let's give me an example of your humming. Come on. Are you going to hum to a tune? Are you just going to hum?
No, they actually said a humming is better if it's a consistent note. That's why the monks used to do a consistent note, because it allows the brain to shut off and disengage. So that,
that's mindfulness, that's meditation.
Yeah, so everything's connected. It's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I guess that would be the sort of type note. Yeah, which, well, oh no, that's all weird stuff. But it probably isn't. It's just been sort of hijacked by certain things. Actually, as you say, it can have a very positive effect in helping us being a mindful state of coherence and joy, really, which does bring very, very positive things to our body. When we're living joyfully, it affects us really, really positively. And I think humming is a sign of joy. I often hum to myself, because it's like I'm making a joyful sound in a sense. I talk to myself. I get a lot of sense out of myself. So, it's better than listening to a whole lot of other rubbish out there. But actually, I'm encouraging myself often in positivity, being positive, being joyful.
They did tie the humming into hemisync. The guy brings it together with the binaural beats and that sort of thing as well. So I just found the whole YouTube video very very encouraging for me to. And it's amazing how God all of a sudden picks things up for you to learn about, and next thing, because of YouTube, once I listened to that, everything was coming up about humming. So I'm going, oh my gosh, now I'm being bombarded by humming.
Yep, that's what algorithms do. You look at something showing interest and it says, oh, they're interested in this. I'll give them a bit more to look at or listen to. Yeah, I mean, I find that really helpful. If I'm ever looking at YouTube or whatever, or if I'm looking at Facebook, sometimes all the stuff that I don't want to see, I just get rid of. I block it. I'm not interested in that. The stuff I do want to see, which is usually woodwork videos, stuff from my favorite football team, Grace Awakening Network stuff, I get lots of that on my stream. And anything that isn't, I just block it. Then I don't get much more of it. So they learn your way of what you would like to see and engage. You know, and that's, to me, that's helpful. It means I don't have to go and search for a whole load of stuff. It just comes to me. You know, I mean, I'm sort of a geek when it comes to stuff and YouTube and everything. So I'm, you know, doing some research on solar batteries and all that stuff. We got solar panels, looking at maybe getting a heat pump or something, looking at the cost benefits and how they work. And I get loads and loads of things come up in my YouTube thing, which are all about renewable energy, which is really helpful. Then the ones I really find interesting, I subscribe to them, then I'll see them anyway, because they'll come up and be notified when they post something. You know, so I find this stuff really useful and helpful. You know, I'm not like, oh, big brother, he's there doing this. At the end of the day, what's the problem with being given stuff to see that you're interested in? You know, and not seeing the stuff you're not interested in, which you can teach it that you're not interested in certain stuff. You know, a few years ago when all of the Q stuff and the Trump stuff was going on and all that, it's like, you know, I just deleted and blocked every political thing that was coming all the time, whether it was coming from Christians or not. Now I don't see any of it because I'm just not interested in that sort of negativity.
Such incredible benefits simply from nature, just walking barefoot, touching trees, just the sunlight. I mean, thousands and thousands of transactions that take place in the body because of that, all tailor-made for mankind.
Absolutely, yeah. God has created an environment that is healthy for us to live in. When we sort of destroy that environment, then we're affecting our own health. So we want to go with that natural things that are part of creation, that brings about this harmony with creation, that brings about our health and wholeness and well-being. You know, it's all there because God knows what we need. And he knows that we can operate independently. So he's made it that we can connect harmoniously with each other in relationship and with creation relationally to benefit from that in a way which brings everything into wholeness, which is obviously the restoration of all things and restoring everything back to the design of the creator who wants it to be harmoniously in balance in that way. If you enjoy these videos, would you please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe? It really does help. Thank you very much.